Hey, what's going on? William here, and today I wanted to share with you guys three hacks which I've used in my recovery after stroke to consistently overcome fatigue. Now, these are hacks which I've used throughout my recovery, and I thought it would be a really good idea to share this with you guys because I've had a couple of discussions with some of the members of the group, and they've told me that stroke fatigue is still an issue in their recovery and a huge obstacle which is stopping them from doing as many things as they would like to do and also making them less motivated to do as much exercise as they would like. And as we know, exercise is a big component of being able to recover after a stroke. And if you have more energy to do more exercise and live a balanced life similar to one which you had before your stroke, you will be able to get closer to a point in your recovery which was similar to where you were before you had your stroke. And look, I've been there. Like, I still remember 7 years ago, back in the early days of my stroke, I also had a lot of fatigue. And I still remember, like, there were days where I would lie in bed 2 or 3 times before having the energy to do anything. And I admit, I had my stroke when I was 17 years old. So, as someone who had it when he was very young, obviously I did have a little bit of an advantage compared to other people who might have had their stroke when they were a lot older. However, age is not a big factor in whether or not you're going to have more levels of fatigue or not. As we all know, the brain is very plastic, neuroplasticity, something which you guys have probably heard of quite a lot as people on your recovery after stroke. And the brain is more or less a product of its own environment, which means that if we implement the correct strategies, which are very effective and specifically target the brain, then we can possibly teach the brain how to tap into its untapped reserves after stroke to give us the energy when we need it to do things which we would like to do, such as exercise, going out, returning to work, for those of you guys who are looking to return to work, and basically all the things which one would want to do to get as close as possible to who they were before their stroke or who they want to be after their stroke. These hacks are things which I've really kept to myself for a long time right now. These were not taught to me by my occupational therapist or my physios. This is all my own personal research, so I really hope that they will help you out. Some of them will help you, some of them won't. But one thing is certain, and that is that I'll be lying if I said that they wouldn't provide some benefit for you if you tried them out in the long run. So before we get into it, I thought it would be a good idea to just cover why it is that we feel so tired after stroke and why this fatigue never seems to go away. So I want you to all take a moment to imagine what your life was before a stroke. What sort of things you typically did before your stroke. For example, for those of you guys who were working, you might have, you know, a typical day for you guys might have been that you woke up, you had your breakfast, you went to work, and then you came home and you had dinner and you called it a day. Now, for some of you, this left you quite tired, and for others of you, you still had quite a lot of energy at the end of the day. The reason why the reason why we're able to do all these things without feeling tired is mainly because our brain has very specialized cells in it which are responsible for helping to create energy for us to do the things which we would do on a day-to-day basis. And the way in which they do this is by using oxygen. And although this sounds really good, these cells eventually get tired. And the reason why you felt tired before your stroke when you went through some days and not others is because for these cells to help you do the things which you wanted to do before your stroke, they would have to respond to the natural stress which the environments you were exposed to put on your body. Like for example, if you were a avid swimmer, or if you were someone who really enjoyed sports, the reason why some days you still had quite a lot of energy, and the reason why some days you didn't have as much energy, is because on some days the stress which your body was exposed to was too much for these cells to handle, and on other days your cells were able to appropriately adapt to the stress which your body was exposed to. For example, if you were doing something which didn't require you to put in a lot of effort. Now, the reason why we feel fatigued after stroke is because stroke actually causes a disruption in the way in which these cells are able to produce energy, and therefore our body or our brain is not as resilient at adapting to stress as it used to be. And this stress is actually called oxidative stress. And basically, it's the reason why we die. And that's because throughout our lifespan, our cells are constantly working to keep us alive. And over the course of the many years which we live, they're constantly being exposed to the stress of our environment until eventually they get really tired and they can't function anymore and they die. So after a stroke, the brain damage which is caused by the stroke actually puts a lot of stress on the brain and a lot of stress on these cells to try and respond and adapt to the damage which has been done. And what this does is it actually causes these cells to release a lot of proteins and a lot of chemicals, which causes an imbalance in chemicals which are used to respond to stress, and also chemicals which actually stress the brain a lot more, which are things which we're going to be covering in the next slide. So basically, just to summarize this part, after a stroke, the brain injury and the loss of oxygen caused to the brain puts a huge strain on these cells and their ability to adapt to this newfound stress, which actually causes them to not work as well as they used to. And that's why we feel tired. So what is the solution to overcoming stroke fatigue? But now that we've covered why it is that we have stroke fatigue, the ideal way to actually overcome fatigue or get to a place where we have more energy to do things is to find ways to actually try and restore the flow and appropriate use of oxygen used by these cells, to teach them and help them to use oxygen in a manner like they used to before your stroke, to help them create energy as required, as well as adapt to stresses as well as they used to before your stroke. And in order to get to this point, these cells have to be able to learn to appropriately balance a level of pro-oxidants and antioxidants. Now, for those of you who haven't done a lot of study in this area, who haven't been exposed to some of these fancy terms, pro-oxidants are basically things which cause oxidative stress on the brain. And these are things which force the brain to adapt to its environment and essentially stress the brain out. And examples of these are really intensive exercise, where you're doing exercise for 2 or 3 hours, which has gotten you to the point where you're really exhausted, as well as things like pesticides or spending time in environments which are really toxic and musky and not really good for you. Which is why you might have found that before your stroke, that sometimes when you spent time in an environment which wasn't really healthy for your brain, for example, an office environment which had a lot of bright lights, that you naturally felt a little bit tired. That's because in this scenario, there were more pro-oxidants than antioxidants to actually counter the effect of oxidative stress. Antioxidants are those chemicals in your brain which actually help to prevent this oxidative stress from happening, and also stop it from making you feel fatigued. The bad thing about this is that pro-oxidants are actually naturally occurring. As I mentioned before, oxidative stress is something which occurs throughout your entire lifespan. It's not something which we can completely remove. However, it is something which we can overcome if we stick to a very strict discipline of applying certain strategies consistently every day, or at least 3 times a week for as long as you would like, until you get to a point where you feel like you've got your energy at a point where you're able to do everything which you need to do and want to do. Now, I think I covered a lot of stuff there. I think I've actually gone over to the next slide, but anyway, I'll go on to there and I'll just talk anyway. So we cannot stop oxidative stress because it's, yeah, okay, so I covered that. Okay, I just had a huge blunder, but I'm just gonna keep going with it. It's really late now. So the key to overcoming fatigue is to help these specialized cells in our brain to use oxygen better, or to balance out the levels of pro-oxidants and antioxidants in the brain, so that they can help to create energy like they used to before our stroke, as well as adapt to the stresses which are placed on us after our stroke, as well as they used to before our stroke. Now, there are certain ways to do this, and these are the things which I've personally done to help overcome my own fatigue levels. Like I said at the start, some of these might be for you, some of them might not be for you, depending on what situation you're in. However, I believe that they're all quite useful if you can have enough energy to do them all at least 3 times a week. Probably repeated myself about 6 times, but that's fine. I'm just going to go on. So the first way in which you can overcome fatigue counterintuitively is actually exercise. And the reason why exercise is such a good way of overcoming fatigue is because whenever we actually exercise, it increases the flow of oxygen to our brain. And this is why sometimes after you've had like a workout before your stroke, or after you've gone for a run, you might have found that you were more energized than before. It's because it's because when you exercise, you actually encourage a lot of blood flow to the brain, and as we know, blood contains a lot of oxygen, which help to deliver a lot of oxygen to the brain, which allowed these cells to produce a lot more energy than when you were doing nothing and sitting still. So one thing I recommend for all of you to try is at least 3 times a week, or every day if you're able to, at least do 20 minutes of just really light aerobic exercise. It could be walking for maybe 3 or 6 months, just to have a test to see whether or not you notice any improvements in your energy levels. Now, a huge caveat with exercise is that if you actually do too much, so if you do too much to the point where you actually feel exhausted, it can actually put too much stress on your brain, and it can make you feel more tired. And this is because you're pushing these cells to the point where the pro-oxidants are where there are too many pro-oxidants than antioxidants to allow the brain to appropriately adapt to the stress which has been placed on the body or the brain. And likewise, depending on what stage you are in your recovery, if you're early, I do recommend that you nap as required. There's no shame in having a long nap before you do exercise or after exercise. In fact, it's actually good for the brain because, as we know, the more sleep we have, actually, when we go to sleep, that's where our brain takes in everything we experience during the day and uses these experiences as building blocks to help us become a lot better by making new connections, by teaching itself how to become more resilient and become better at a skill which we're trying to learn. And energy is no different. Now, the next one might be a little bit controversial for you guys, depending on whether or not you're having a pacemaker or what advice you've been given by your doctors or your neurologist. But I thought I would include it anyway because this is going to be really useful for some of you. I know it was really useful for me, especially when I was recovering in the early days. And this is basically taking either coffee or green tea. Now, coffee and green tea are great because both coffee and tea contain huge amounts of chemicals which are called polyphenols. And polyphenols are basically really strong antioxidants. And as we know, antioxidants help to actually overcome and reduce the amount of stress which our brain is exposed to. And the reason why is because they actually help to fight the effect of oxidative stress and help reduce it, which is why a lot of research has shown that people with Alzheimer's disease, um, people with Alzheimer's disease actually don't actually people are at less risk of developing Alzheimer's disease if they've had a lot of antioxidants in their brain, and this is why. And it's because Alzheimer's is caused by cells being exposed to so much stress to the point where they're unable to conduct signals as well as they used to help a person remember things as well as they would like. Now, coffee and green tea, there are two big differences between the two. I personally go with coffee because coffee has the bonus of helping with learning, and this is because it contains something called dopamine, which is something which might ring some bells for you guys, and also it's a very good stimulant. Coffee is also coffee also helps coffee also helps to coffee also helps coffee has actually been shown to help grow new cells in the brain as well. So because it also helps with learning and it also helps with the antioxidant side of things, I personally like coffee. However, if you are someone with a pacemaker or if you are someone who has been told to avoid caffeine, I would suggest that you actually check with your doctor before you take this one. Now, green tea is very different to coffee, and it was actually supposed to be in this third dot point. My bad that it wasn't. However, the way in which it helps to overcome fatigue is very different to coffee. Green tea, green tea is something which you want to take if you're not looking for a huge spike in energy, as it delivers, as it stimulates the brain very differently to coffee does. Coffee, coffee, what you'll find by taking is that it actually gives you a huge energy spike, but then after a couple of hours, you suddenly get a big crash in energy and you feel like going to sleep. Green tea, on the other hand, delivers this stimulation and this energy over a long period of time, which means that you don't get that huge crash. Me personally, I find that coffee works a lot better for me because I use it because I use it because I've been using it for a long time. Green tea, I personally haven't used it a lot, but when I have used it, I find that green tea it doesn't really work that well for me for some reason. I feel that I get more energy off coffee. But like I said, I put in green tea here anyway. For those of you guys who are a little bit worried about your pacemaker or about what advice you've been given by your doctor. So to each its own. Now the next strategy which you can try to use to overcome fatigue is by eating grapes. So there's this thing called willpower fatigue, right? And basically it's this idea that throughout the day we get more and more tired with more and more decisions we make. And eventually, this depletes our ability to make more decisions and have enough willpower to do more things and more things that we had planned. And this is most of the time due to the fact that we have a reduced glucose level in the brain. Now, what grapes have been shown to do is they've actually been shown to restore this glucose level or this low blood sugar level and actually help fire up our brains to be able to to do to have the energy to do things which we would like to do. And I thought it's actually a really good alternative because grape seed extract is a natural blood thinner. However, grapes on their own are not a blood thinner. So for those of you guys who are on blood thinners, this might be something to consider. But again, check your doctor anyway. Another thing, grapes are also a good source of polyphenols, which is always really good, as I described in the previous slide. These are things which are contained in both coffee and tea, and they're also very strong antioxidants which help to fight the effect of oxidative stress, which, as we know, is the biggest factor in why we feel fatigue after stroke. So those are basically the main things which I've used to sort of hack my own energy levels after stroke. I really hope you found this useful. But really, the biggest thing which you've guys got to consider if you're really serious about trying to test these things out and try and overcome your fatigue after stroke is to have a look at your whoops, I think I went to the wrong slide. Yeah, so grapes are really good. They yeah, I mean I already explained it. Grapes are really good for helping you to overcome your fatigue levels, but another way to also overcome your fatigue levels is to remain hydrated throughout the day. This is really common sense, but it can make a huge difference throughout the day. I personally found that waking up and just drinking half a gallon in the morning can help me last a long time throughout the morning, and I don't even have to drink coffee. I find that sometimes if I have the morning coffee and I start to get a little bit tired in the afternoon, that if I start to drink 2 or 3 cups of water, that I can actually get more energy to last throughout the night and be able to do a lot of the things which I had planned out to do. So those are basically the main hacks which I use to overcome my own fatigue levels, which I found to be really beneficial for myself. I know that was probably more than three. However, if you are really serious about trying to overcome fatigue, or if you just want to test, see if some of this stuff works, the biggest thing which can influence your fatigue will be your long-term diet. And by this I mean trying to choose a diet which is completely composed of organic foods, which are rich in polyphenols. And these are your cereals, your legumes, your oil seeds, and obviously your fruits and green veggies, which you've probably heard from your doctors as things which you should eat. And also dark chocolate is also a good thing to try out, because dark chocolate dark 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 chocolate is dark dark chocolate has high levels of antioxidants and is also a polyphenol in itself. So if you're ever feeling really tired in the afternoon, or if you really want to do more exercise, it's always good to just try having some dark chocolate to sort of warm up your brain to being able to do more exercise, or giving you that really quick energy spike if you need it. Next thing, try to avoid processed foods with MSG. For example, this is going to be things like your McDonald's or your Chinese takeaway. You might have found that before your stroke, or even after your stroke, that after you ate Chinese food or after you went to a buffet, that you felt really tired. Well, the reason why you felt really tired after a buffet or after eating Chinese takeout is because the cells in your brain are get are being exposed to so much stress, which is caused by these processed foods, that they're trying to work a lot harder to overcome the inflammation which is caused by these processed foods. So the chemicals in processed foods, such as your McDonald's, they're actually causing some oxidative stress to your brain, which is stressing out these cells and causing them to try and adapt to this imbalance in pro-oxidants, things which cause the stress, and also trying to use antioxidants to counteract this stress, which the brain is being exposed to, or the body is being exposed to. So all in all, it's good to optimize your brain health with really good stuff. These are things which this is something which I'm only just starting to get into. However, I've been doing it for a long time. I try my best to avoid a lot of McDonald's and takeaway food. If anything, most of my diet is eating sushi. I love eating sushi. Not only is it a good source of omega-3 oils, which is good for the brain, but it's also a very healthy alternative compared to your McDonald's or your KFC. Everything in moderation. So those are three hacks, if not more, for you to try to test out to see if they make a difference in overcoming your fatigue after stroke. Uh, there are, and yeah, let me know how it goes. I mean, I'm really open to hearing your thoughts about whether or not some of these have worked for you. What's stopping you from being able to do these things? What's getting in the way? And some of the things, and I don't know, like just some of the things which you're finding a little bit tricky in your recovery after stroke. I've really been through the ringer in my own experience. I'm having seen patients myself who have had a stroke and who have gone through a different experience to mine as a occupational therapy student, as well as my own experience. So I'm really open to your thoughts. Let me know.